This is the Cedar Creek Church Living It Out podcast, a midweek reminder where we discuss key takeaways and principles from the weekend message to help you live out the truth that you matter.
Hi, welcome to the Living Out podcast. My name is Ben Bacher here with Marna Ward and Sarah, and this podcast really is a weekly midweek reminder to kind of talk about the weekend message, some of the key takeaways and points. And this past weekend, we had Barb Roos with us, and that's always a great time when she comes and teaches. We'll be talking about that here shortly. But before we did, I'd love to hear from you guys. Just kind of a fun question. When you guys have a long day of work or a long day of whatever, and you get home, I know we're home all the time right now, but think about, if you were off and you got home, like, what do you guys love to do to relax on a nice summer afternoon?
Oh, this is such a good question. The weather has been so beautiful that it's like, I mean, there's something about that, like 4 to 7 or 8 o'clock for me on these summer days, like as it moves from the heat of the day into the twilight, like I feel like that's such a cool way to unwind from a long day, is just to be outside, just get, it just kind of rejuvenates you either way. And so I love to, when the weather's nice, to get outside when it's been a long day. Or for me, it's really just ultimately taking a walk, somehow doing something physical to get me out of whatever the rhythm has been for a long day. So I can't say that that's always been it. I don't want anybody to think I'm like, and so fitness has been totally my answer for like that's somewhat of, kind of a new space for me a little bit. But how about you, Sarah?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, this weather has been beautiful. So anytime I can get outside, I do. And I love to read outside. That's one of my favorite things. And so recently, our family, do your family like pass around books? Like, oh, you got to read this, you got to read this. So we've been passing around this Amish mystery series, which sounds so weird, but it's actually great. So I pick up my little mystery novel and read outside. It's been good.
I love it.
That's great. Like, when do you do that? Because I know you've got the little kids, so you get them in bed and then you go out and do that, or?
Yep, after they're in bed, they're normally down by about 7:45, and then it's that golden hour of perfection. So then I sit out there and read a little bit when I can. So it's nice.
I love that, Sarah. Gosh, when my kids were little, I remember thinking if I could just have 5 or 10 minutes, as they get older, your time elongates quite a bit again. But there's other times where you're like, it's been a really long day. If I could I'll take 5 minutes. Like I will take 5 minutes, How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I think for me right now, and I've been working in my basement or up in my bedroom, so I'll go downstairs and just be like, okay, I'm done for the day. And with the weather the way it is, just trying to capitalize on it, go for a walk, ride our bikes, or whatever. So there's always, that transition time when you're at an office building, which we will be back soon, but you get like 15, 20 minutes to car ride to transition. Okay, I'm done with work. Now I'm, putting on my dad hat, to where here it's like, you walk downstairs and that transition is a little shorter. So a lot of times I'll just jump in with whatever they're doing. Once they're in bed, yeah, it's just quiet is what relaxes me. So definitely a lot of moments to be grateful for, which we'll get a chance to talk about here in a little bit. I know Barb talked a little bit about what we're going through, in 2020 has been a little bit crazy for everybody. She had the commemorative candle for 2020, which was a dumpster fire candle, which I thought was
waste
perfect.
Management green candle, like that was amazing. Yes.
Right. I think the one thing I loved about that too was like, and especially tying it with her talk, is like, have you ever seen a dumpster fire before? Like I've literally seen one before. I was probably in 6th grade. We went to a restaurant over on Alexis Road, and these kids caught a dumpster on fire. And I think my cousin was with them. That's why we're like, oh my goodness, my cousin's, but it's mesmerizing. Like, you can't look away from it. It just is like this thing that captures your attention. And I think that's a lot of times when things are just going wrong, like the negative, and Barb talked about this negative bias, that when things are going wrong in our lives or around us, we can't help but focus in, on those things. If you guys, what were some of your thoughts when she talked about the negative bias that we all have as humans?
Man, I thought that was super interesting when you think about, just even as you hear people talk about, like, well, if you don't set intention, you will drift into inaction. And you think about both what our thoughts lending themselves towards the negative, our actions lending themselves towards actually inaction. It's like, man, that could leave you in some serious space of negative inaction that kind of all went together for me. So I don't know that I had seen a study like that before. So I thought it was really interesting that we're wired to kind of do that, and we have to be so intentional the other way. So yeah, how about you, Sarah?
Well, it's been interesting. I've even seen this in my kids. So Jack, our oldest, he's 4. And it's funny when my husband, when he'll come home from work, and Brett will be like, hey guys, how was your day? Jack's first inclination is to be like, well, I accidentally did this, and then this was my bad choice, and that, and he like rattles off like, the moments that were not great throughout the day. And, I don't feel like we've pushed him to do that or anything, but it's almost this like natural, like that's what he's been focused on, or that's what he's remembered, or whether it's like a confession to dad, I don't know, but like he rattles off all the bad stuff. It's interesting.
That is interesting. Huh.
Yeah, that is. I think about, yeah, a lot of times when you do have conversations with people, like, hey, how's it going? Well, it can drift to the negative pretty quickly.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think really Barb, when she talked about this negative bias, the challenge that she gave each one of us was to change our perspective, to change our perspective from the negative and remember that God is still in control. And
Mhm.
one of the ways that she did this and kind of led us through this talk was by sharing a story of the Israelites and what they went through. I think they were 6 weeks out from leaving slavery and leaving the Egyptian land that they were enslaved. And then they find themselves in the middle of the desert 6 weeks later. And what are some of the things that we read about them going through at those times?
I love that it's been 6 weeks and that you're sort of focusing on it, because when you think about everything we've been through over
Right.
this time frame, there are some similarities, if you will. The difference is that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, and Pharaoh was not nice. Things, in fact, were getting harder and harder for them. And so it is a really interesting space where God has performed these absolute miracles in order to release them from Egypt and really the slavery that they were in there. And Barb sort of did that quick, like, okay, and then they did this, and then they did this, and God parted the sea, and they
Mhm.
crossed over, and
Right.
then sort of thing. But literally, not just were they set free, but the miracles and everything that led up to that. And so yeah, we find ourselves 6 weeks later. Egypt looks good again. They've forgotten. Here's what's interesting. It's like in the moment we focus on the negative, but when we look back, we've got some rose-colored glasses on, and that's a bit what they're doing. It's like, man, we could eat whatever we wanted, and the fruit was amazing, and we had we had everything we wanted. I
Right.
mean, forget about the enslavement. We had to work, and no, they didn't care, and like all the stuff that was. So it creates this real tension point, certainly in the relationship that God has reinitiated with them as His people. But it speaks to our hearts too today. So that, I mean, the whole thing. If you have not read Exodus, it is a heck of a read. In fact, I just got done reading it, so it's really fresh for me on some of this. So
Don't you find too that when you read that story, it's so easy to be like, ah, these silly Israelites, like, can't they just focus on the good, And then, God, what are we doing? It's
yeah.
like when we read, we can look at it very differently than when we actually reflect on our own life and how we're living it. It's convicting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as we close our Bibles, right? Or, turn off the Bible app, like, give me 5 minutes. I don't even need 6 weeks, you guys. Give me five
Right.
minutes,
That's a great point. I think, yeah, you're right. So they find themselves complaining, saying, woe is me, remembering the good old days. And then, I mean, they're hot, they're hungry, they're tired, and God hears them and he meets them right where they're at. And he
Yeah.
sends them manna in the morning. So imagine waking up and all this bread is on the ground. And then in the evening, he sends meat with the quail, and he provides for them in their need. And I think that was one of the things that Barb talked about was God takes care of his children at all times, and
Mhm.
especially those really hard times. So I think that's something that we can think about when we're in those hard times, to change our perspective and focus on that. And then also the second thing she said was God's faithfulness doesn't depend on us, which I thought was a great point. So what are some of your thoughts behind that statement of God's gratefulness or his faithfulness doesn't depend on us?
Mhm.
I think the interesting thing about God is he is a good father, and he is always good, and it doesn't depend on us. So like, put in any characteristic you want. Could be faithful, could be kind, could be merciful. Like, he is all of that.
Mhm.
On our worst days, when we're full of complaining, when we're when we're grateful, like when we're, when everything's been good, and we're like, he is constant, he's unchanging. And I think for me, that's so comforting, because whether we're in a season that's terrible or something really hard that we've walked through, or when things are great and we just want to celebrate, or we want to worship, or we want to praise him for what he's doing, like he's always there,
Mhm.
and something so comforting about that we don't have to perform, we don't have to, we can just be, because he is,
Mm-hmm.
and I just, so comforting.
Yeah, there's incredible freedom in that space too. I think when you can really embrace that in your own heart, that provision, his faithfulness, his characteristics, all the things that Sarah talked about are not dependent on me. And in fact, what he really calls us to is to rely on that so that we can become more of those things and not do it on our own. So, um, I think one of the fascinating pieces about this, to your point, when he provides manna for them in the morning and quail for them at night, like, he actually meets them in the midst of their complaints,
Mm-hmm.
which in some ways you kind of want to be like, oh, like, stop complaining and don't, like, I think
Right.
about my reaction if my kids are complaining for candy, I'm not like giving them, sort of thing. But it's funny how his grace is so apparent in some of this, and that he literally meets them right there with what they asked for, not just what they needed, but an additional step of what they asked for. And certainly they needed sustenance at some level, but his provision goes beyond just what they needed, and even steps into a bit of what they requested and wanted, even in their complaints. And so that's where I think is so important to come into these stories just really cognizant of our own hearts, like we talked about before, but then also just looking for him in the midst of it, like setting ourselves
Right.
aside and going, what is it that we see about God in this story? And praise, praise, praise that it's not dependent on us. Because, like I said, I'll close the Bible and 5 minutes later, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And so I think those are the places that help us to really recognize who he is and how that can really impact the ways that we start to set that kind of stuff down.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think when I think of Barb's talk, she said this is more than just a provision story. It's an
Yeah.
opportunity of getting to know God, the Creator, and she talked about Thanksgiving versus Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving's
Mhm.
like, give me please, where Thanksgiving's realizing who it is that's giving to you and having a
Mhm.
friendship with him. She used the verses Jeremiah 10:6, Lord, there is no one like you, for you are great and your name is full of power. So like in that interaction that the Israelites were having with God, it was an opportunity for them to get to know God and see, one, that he was a provider, but he was so much more than just providing for their immediate need, but he was more than that as well. So great points. I think one of the fun things from this weekend was the gratitude glasses. You know, Barb was up on stage with those big glasses. I saw Ben Snyder posting with them, and I think it was just a great visual. I know Martin and you and I had talked about this over the weekend too. Something came up at work, and we're like, well, let's put on our gratitude glasses and see it from a positive point of view. But what are some of your thoughts behind gratitude glasses? How has that maybe affected the way you've thought about things over the last couple of days?
Sarah, I'm totally picturing your boys with these gratitude glasses on. It would be so amazing.
Oh my goodness. No, we have really tried in this season to instill like conversations around gratitude with them. Because I mean, like I mentioned, like for some reason we're just to go to the negative. And I love just some of those practical tips that Barb talked about. The glasses, the 1,000 gifts. Like I know Marna, you and I've talked about that book before. Such a great read. And it's almost like we just need to be prompted to do this. And for us, we'll go around the table and we'll ask the boys, like what was the best part of your day, and then we'll also be like, what was the sad part, as we're helping them process their emotion and everything. But just to prompt them, like let's thank God for the good day, and then those turn into our nighttime prayers too. And so I think whether you're a child, whether you're an adult, like just taking the time to put on the glasses, like you guys did, even when it comes to related things, like just taking the moment to pause. Okay, I could be a total grump right now, which like there's time and space for all that. But if I did slip on that pair of gratitude glasses, like what am I not seeing? Because there's probably some good here, but we have to be intentional and we have to see it.
Yeah, I think what I loved about it too is that anytime we can prompt ourselves for a change in perspective, even if it's just helping us to see it in a more well-rounded way, it's like inviting all of that to the table in some ways. If we don't, I mean, again, it's like 5 minutes later, I'm back in my own head about how I see it. And so I love combining the practical with the spiritual. So when I think about the super practical things that Barb offered to us, like those are practical steps, right? Like you'll read this in magazines and parenting stuff and whatever, but the great joy comes when we can combine that with who God is. Some of the things that we talked about before, in a prayer, in gratefulness, in recognizing that all things are from Him, and knowing that He provides for us in any season, that it's not up to us. Like I think that causes that. It almost in us brings forward more of Him and who He is, so that we can connect in those ways. And certainly we could do the boxes and the jars and put on the glasses without the spiritual, and those will get us so far, right? But I think that combination of those two things and being able to know these stories, understand how God works, and who He is really so key, certainly as parents and passing it on to our kids, but honestly, just for all the interactions that we have. So I'm definitely going to get a pair of big plastic glasses and just that'd be fun to set on the kitchen table, right?
That would be fun. That's great.
I think, Marna, like you're making me think. I feel like this is a muscle, but like the more we do this, the more it will change our default from the negative. Like, don't you find that when you go through a season where you're better at focusing on the good, or you're journaling what you're grateful for, like whatever that may be, you're just more intentional about it. Like it's almost like a muscle, and it does get stronger, and then your income does change a bit. And you'll probably take a roller coaster back to the other side too. But it is a muscle, I think, that we can improve as we lean into it, which is good news.
Yeah, that is good news.
Yeah. So I had an opportunity to write one of the Living Outs this coming week. So Friday I wrote is the post that I wrote will come out this coming Friday. So I wrote about Corrie Ten Boom, and Barb used a quote from her. But she's got an amazing story of she's in the concentration camp, this labor camp with her sister, and she's getting bit by all these fleas. And she's like, how is it that we can even live it like this? How can we live like this? And then her sister's like, oh, I have the answer. I read it in the Bible today. and she read 1 Thessalonians 5:18, be thankful in every circumstance, for this is God's will for you to belong to Christ Jesus. And she's
Mm.
like, she like looks up and she's looking around and she sees these bunk beds, these cold, hard bunk beds that they're laying on. All these women are sick and tired, and it smells. And like then she starts thinking about that verse, and like it's like she put these glasses on and she started seeing that her sister was there with her, and she was grateful for that. They had a Bible that they were able to smuggle in, and that there was no inspection when they were brought there. Um, all these women that were huddled around them that were hearing about Jesus for the very first time. And she's like had this, all of a sudden this realization of, even in the worst place, I have something, these things to be thankful for. And it turns out these fleas, as were really getting at her, um, they actually were causing the guards and the Nazi guards to not even come over to where they were. So they had more freedom than most other camps, or sections of the camp. And it was just this, just kind of this, seeing her perspective and her focus shift, like in a moment, was pretty powerful. So I think like putting a verse like that on your refrigerator, or putting it on a 3x5 card and carrying it around with you, whatever situation or circumstance you're finding yourself in, there's reason to be thankful in that circumstance for sure. So yeah, I
Gosh,
love
what a
that.
visual. Yeah. I don't know if this will translate well in the podcast, but for me, whenever I hear that verse, I always, the visual for me that I picture is like, no matter what's happening around me, I could close my eyes, and the same thing is true about God, whether I open my eyes and it looks amazing, or I open my eyes and I cannot believe what's in front of me. Like the thought of like just being able to close my eyes, and no matter what the circumstance is, that when I open, like he's still unchanging. So there, I don't know, like I said, I don't know that that translates real well, but for some reason that's the visual that he always brings to me when I hear that verse, that our circumstances when we open our eyes can look like anything. And if this season has taught us nothing else, it's that, I mean, it, we have to be ready
Mhm.
for whatever is going to come next. And the circumstances can change in the blink of an eye. And we know it. We've just all experienced it in some collective ways. But I just keep thinking, okay, Lord, if I close my eyes and I connect with you, and no matter what it looks like when I open my eyes, you are still the same. And that he still gives us the ability to be grateful in those places. So, man, that's powerful stuff.
Yeah, well said. So if you're listening today, I just want to encourage you to pause, take a moment, close your eyes like Marna said. Think about that verse from 1 Thessalonians 5:17 or 5:18. Um, and then Sarah, I think you had some great things as far as like, what are 3 things that you're celebrating today? What are 3 things that are difficult? And then give thanks for those things as well. And I think also with Barb's definition, she's like, it's one thing to identify things to be gratitude or grateful for, but then share it with somebody, pass it along. So I think that's a step we can take as well. So thanks so much for some great conversation. I think as we look forward to some things coming up at Cedar Creek, what do we have coming up this weekend?
Well, we are looking forward to an interview with the Sweeneys. Ben and Lauren are going to be sitting down with Calvin and Christine, which just are 2 phenomenal people. And so I'm really excited to hear what God has put on their hearts, what they're going to share with our church. And I think it's an opportunity to lean in, learn, and really just, again, be ready to receive what God has for us in it.
For sure. We also have, I think this weekend, right, kicks off our group semester.
Yeah, this weekend is groups. It's groups, groups, groups. Yay! So if you are not connected in a group, the directory is open. It's an opportunity to really look through the groups that are available at all the campuses, check them out. Summer is always just a really fun semester because it's 6 weeks long. And so if you haven't done a group before, it's a great time to try one out. And I know that we're all looking forward to getting underway. And I just think summer's just a really fun time to connect this way. I swear God does something sitting, you know, in the midst of the good weather, and we're like, you know, taking time to connect with each other. So especially since we haven't been able to be at physical services together, it's just a great, great step to take. So you can go to cedarcreek.tv/groups, just hit join a group, and our directory is right there that you can check it out.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for making the Living Out podcast part of your day. And we just hope you guys have a great week, and we will see you soon.